The colonists first arrived in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. King James I of England chartered a joint stock company establishing the first permanent English colony in America. This limited democracy as the English king appointed most officials and governors. Although the Virginia Company made profits from tobacco sales, unwise decisions led it to heavy debt. For this reason, the bankrupt company's charter was revoked in 1624 and the colony became known as Virginia, the first royal colony. Royal colony is a colony under the control of a king or queen. Therefore, the colonists continue to be deprived of their democratic rights.
Puritans separated from the Church of England and moved to America for religious freedom in 1620. These separatists were known as Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower. After a hard voyage of 65 days, the voyagers drafted an agreement for self-leadership of the colony. This document became to be known as the Mayflower Compact. It set up the concept of separation of church and state and the rule of the majority. This became the first self-governing document of colonial America.
American colonies were only allowed to practice a certain degree of self-rule. In Jamestown, colonists had the right to be represented in the lawmaking process. In 1619, colonists in Jamestown organized the first representative assembly in America known as the House of Burgesses. In Massachusetts Bay Colony, there were limited democratic actions. All free males who were members of the Puritan Church had the right to participate in yearly elections of the colony's governor, his assistant, and a representative assembly. This illustrated the limited nature of a colonial democracy. Only male property owners could vote for representatives. Females or those who were landless had few rights, while slaves and indentured servants had none at all.
The Europeans viewed Native Americans as inferiors who could be taken advantage of for their economic, political, and religious gain. Many Native Americans lost their land and their way of life due to the colonists' expansion.
Sir William Berkeley, the royal governor of Virginia, adopted policies that favored large planters and used dictatorial powers. Nathaniel Bacon, a poor farmer, and others resented the economic and political control by the few large planters in Chesapeake Bay. In 1676, Bacon and his army of indentured servants conducted a series of raids and massacres against Indian villages. This rebellion highlighted two long-lasting disputes in colonial Virginia's sharp class differences that discriminated against poor farmers and the colonial resistance to royal control.
In 1639, Connecticut established the first constitution in colonial America, calling for the power of the government to be derived from the governed. This was known as Fundamental Orders.
The New England colonies held town meetings in which male landowners could participate in lawmaking decisions. In 1685, King James II increased royal control and took away representative assemblies. The Dominion of New England comprised of New York, New Jersey, and various colonies that were created. The governor of the Dominion, Sir Edmund Andros, levied taxes, limited town meetings, and revoked land titles. The fall of the Dominion led to Massachusetts Bay, New York, and other colonies operating under separate charters.
The British passed a series of acts taxing the American colonies without representation in their government. The colonists reacted against the taxation by forming the First Continental Congress. They petitioned for the Parliament to stop their taxation. The Parliament responded with the idea of virtual representation. The inability to settle the dispute led to the American Revolutionary War and the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, which called for one's rights to liberty, life, and pursuit of happiness.
Abigail Adams sought to take advantage of her husband, John Adams' political involvement by initiating women's involvement in political affairs.
As an independent country, America drafted the Articles of Confederation. This created a central government with one legislative branch.
Due to the lack of powers initiated by the Articles of Confederation and the need for stronger control of the colonies, delegates met in Philadelphia to draft the Constitution. Ratified in 1787, the Constitution created a three-branch government system with the idea of checks and balances. Anti-federalists fought for the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, which gave American citizens individual rights.
In creating the legislative branch, a compromise of the Virginia and New Jersey Plan was made, known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. This counted every 5 black slaves as 3 people to determine the state's level of taxation and representation.
The 1820s and the presidency of Andrew Jackson marked the political era of Jacksonian democracy. He appealed to the politics of the common man and believed the president should exercise all due power to ensure the protection of individual rights. During this era, Jackson supported the spread of universal male suffrage, regardless of land ownership. He also was successful in expanding democracy to the middle and lower class by creating new democracy, which reduced voting requirements in many states. Although Jackson was successful in protecting the middle and lower class, he failed at protecting the rights of Native Americans. In the Trail of Tears, they were forcibly removed from their native land. The legislation of the Indian Removal Act, signed in 1830, further prompted the tragedy of Indian relocation.
In the mid-1800s, Northern abolitionists began fighting for ending of slavery. The anti-slavery movement prompted the divide of North and Southern states. This division would lead to the Civil War, which resulted in the freedom of slaves in the 13th Amendment, and also the passage of 14th and 15th Amendments, which recognized African Americans as citizens and gave male blacks the right to vote.
Although African Americans were recognized politically, they suffered from social discrimination. Their rights to practice democracy were denied due to the Southern passage of Jim Crow laws, which segregated public facilities, and grandfather clauses, which installed literacy tests and poll taxes, limiting their rights to vote.
Indians were once again denied their democratic rights during this era. Although they were civilized tribes with their own language and cultures, they were denied official recognition and land rights due to the passage of Dawes Severalty Act in 1887. Gaining citizenship was further prolonged to 25 years only if they assimilated to American culture.
Following the footsteps of Abigail Adams, women sought ways to participate in the democratic government. In the mid-19th century, the rise of women's rights movement fought for women's political rights. In one area of interest was the temperance movement, in which women sought control of family life by banning alcohol. In the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, the feminists drafted the Declaration of Sentiments, which demanded true universal suffrage to include females.
Due to the rise of urban industrialization, there was a massive increase of labor workers. They worked in poor, unhealthy conditions, initiating the establishment of labor unions. These labor unions fought for basic workers' rights. Labor unions gave the lower class workers the opportunity to band together in voicing their grievances. In 1917 and in 1918, the Espionage and Sedition Acts were passed, taking away the right to free speech during wartime. Individual rights given in the First Amendment were disregarded due to the government regulation of uniform support of the war efforts. Citizens' rights were further denied when President Wilson passed the Selective Service Act authorizing the draft of all American males over 16 into military service against their will.
Immigrants in America faced hostility and discrimination. They were denied their democratic practices until they gained citizenship. In 1942, after the event of Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were thought to have secret alliances with the Japanese government. Therefore, all were forced into internment camps through FDR's Executive Order 9066. All of their basic rights were violated and their daily lives were scrutinized due to racial discrimination by the government. During the Civil Rights Movement during the 1960s, African Americans fought for equal treatment in America. Grandfather clauses were removed and segregation was banned through the Brown v. Board of Education. The actions of civil rights movement leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King illustrated the growing African American sentiments towards achieving social equality.
The youth of the 1960s protested against social conformity and illustrated the rise of counterculture. They rioted and protested in response to the ongoing Vietnam War and other Cold War tensions. This outcry demonstrated the young generation's practices of freedom of speech, petition, and assembly given to all American citizens in the Bill of Rights. Due to the Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union, Americans feared the rise of communism. This led to the American hostility toward communists, which was demonstrated during the Red Scare. During this time, the Supreme Court violated individual rights by accusations and imprisonment without sufficient evidence.
After the event on 9/11, the U.S. government grew in homeland security. By passing the USA Patriot Act, the government gained rights to closely monitor the daily activities of Americans, violating their privacy. This is still a controversial issue today, so as some Americans speak out against the growing government power and taking away of individual rights.